Good evening. We're going to begin by the Mishnah Daf Yutes and Aleph. It's a new Mishnah, a brand new sugya, and the beginning, the Mishnah is going to explain the halachis of writing of a get. As we know, and we've said many times, the Torah says v'kosaf la sefer krisus, that you have to write a sefer of krisus. So now the Mishnah is going to explain what materials of ink you're allowed to use to write the get, that it could be categorized as v'kosaf. So the Mishnah says, bakol kaisvin, you're allowed to write the get with any material that can be used for writing. All different types of herbs. He says b'dyoy, you could use dyoy, which is a black ink that you write the Sefer Torah. B'sam, sam is a type of metal. B'sikra, it's a type of sikra, is like a red dye. Ube'kumus, kumus is like the sap of a tree. Ube'kankantam, and the kankantam is a black, which is used to dye like hides. So when it comes to all these materials, you're allowed to use them to write a get. Then the Mishnah adds, "U'b'chol davar shu shakayama," and any type of liquids that is permanent. So you're allowed to use that for the gittin. But the Mishnah says, "Ein kaisen le b'mashkin." However, you're not allowed to write the get with liquid. For example, let's say wine or with milk. You're not allowed to use that liquid. And also v'loi b'mei peris, and also juice, liquid, which is squeezed from fruit, also you're not allowed to use that for the gittin. And v'loi b'chol davar she'eino miskayim, and also not with anything that does not produce permanent writing. So that's Bekitzer, okay, so that's the first part of the Mishnah. Nachamal, that you could write the get with Yoy, Sam, Sikr, Bekumis, Kantam, because these are all inks that are permanent, and B'chol davar shusha kayama, but you can't write not with liquid, like we said, not with wine or with milk. You can't use also juice, which is squeezed from pears as well, and v'lei b'chol davar she'eino miskayim, which the Gemara will explain what that means. So that's the first part of the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah says, al hakel kaisvin, you can write, in other words, in regards to the document itself, so you could use any material you want. And the Mishnah explains, al ha'ola shel zayis, you could use a olive leaf. Let's say there's an olive leaf that got detached from the tree, and now you want to use this olive leaf. Val keren shel para, and also on the horn of a cow, if it's still connected to the cow, so you could use this para. V'neisen lasa para, however, he has to actually give the actual cow to his wife. Now, as well, not only that, but al yad shel eved, a person is allowed to write the get on the hand of his servant, and v'neisen la as eved, and he gives the eved to his wife. He gives the servant to his wife. Rabbi S Greenwald says, "Ein kaisvin loy al davar sheish beruach chaim." You're not allowed to write a get on something which has like a breath of, in other words, a living thing. So, for example, the horn of a para, even if it's still connected, or let's say the hands of an eved, because it is a ruach chaim, because it's a living thing, so that's why you're not allowed to write on it. And he says as well, v'lei al ha'echlem, and also you're not allowed to write on food. So, for example, a olive leaf is a meichel for ravens.
The reason is because it's not going to be forever. All the living things will die, and the get will be gone.
So he doesn't say what the reason is. What's the
same way that the writing has to be a forever something that is permanent.
Yeah, so why does the Tanakama argue? Why does the Tanakama say Allah Shal Zayis works? I think the Gemara explains. I think the Gemara speaks about it. Okay, so again, the second part of the Mishnah, we said that you could write on anything. You could write on an olive leaf, which is detached, like Rashi says, and Valkaren Shal Para, and you have to give the para, or you could write on the Eved, but nice unless the Eved basically says no, that you cannot write on something which has Ruach Chaim, and therefore when it comes to a para or a Yad Shal Eved, it won't work, and an Oichlim as well, it will not work. Okay, so now the Gemara says, what's Diyoi? In our Mishnah we said about Koil Kaisvin B'Diyoi. So the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, what's Diyoi? Diyoi is Diyusa. It's Diyusa. In Aramaic it's called Diyusa. Sam, what's Sam? It's called Sama. Sikra, Amar Rabba Baruchana, Sikarta Shma. His name is Sikarta. Koimis, what's Koimis? In Aramaic you call it Kuma. Kankantam, Amar Baruchana, Amar Shmuel. This is Charta de Ushbechei. This is used by people who iron sulfur. In other words, these are people that people that shine the shoes. So that's kankantum. Now, after the Mishnah says Bakol Kaisvin, and then it says the Mishnah started off and say Bakol Kaisvin and it brought different examples, and then it says B'chol Davar Shu Shal Kayam, and anything which is permanent. So asks the Gemara, La Suye Mai, what is the Tana coming to include? So he says, La Suye Ha, the Tana is coming to include the type of ink. The Tana Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Chanina Tana Braisa, Ksavai B'mei Tarya, that if he wrote it with Mei Tarya, and Mei Tarya is it's make shamim, which is collected on the roof and starts dripping on the beams of the house. So that's called Meitarya, and it has like this reddish color, complexion, and Va'afatza, or with Afza, which is Afza is like it's in English it's called a gallnut. So if you wrote it with Meitarya or water in which gallnuts were soaked, so then the din is kosher, it's kosher. Tana Rabbi Chia says, Ksavai be'a. If he wrote it with afar is like a type of lead, so then, in other words, it's water that you soaked like lead and it became black, or bishchar. Bishchar is like a type of coals. So ubishichor, or with like a black paint. So then the halacha is, and you wrote a get with this material, so the halacha is kosher is going to be kosher. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of Hilchas Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos. And as we know, writing and erasing, koisef, ksiv, and mechika are one of the 39 Ovis Malachas, which are mentioned in the Mishnah on Shabbos, Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Now, just the basic din of Shabbos is if a person is over b'mezid, if a person does a malacha on purpose, so the din is he's chayiv misas based in, he's chayiv meskila, the based in stones him. If he does it on purpose, but there's no eidim over there, so then he gets kares. And if he does it b'shegig, so he's chayiv a kar mechatos, and this is really the first in Shabbos. The first Rashi really explains this. We just have this now in Shlosheh Prakim Rambam. The first few prakim there, the Rambam spoke about this halacha. Now, somebody who writes 2 letters or more in any language in a ksav which is permanent, which is miskayim. So the din is he's chayiv for writing. It's part of one of the Avos Malachas ksiva. If a person erases 2 oisius on Shabbos, in order to, he's meichik amanas lichtiv. So the din is weiter. He's also chayiv the din again if it's skila or kares b'dei shemayim, or if he's b'shegi, he has to bring a korban chatos. Now, if a person is meichik amanas lekalkel, so then it's only asur midrabanan, because as we know that like the Rambam says, kol hamekalkel in b'Shabbos is p'turin. Now, so now the Gemara is going to bring a case of if you have ksav al gavi ksav, which means you have writing on top of writing. So in other words, that there's already letters written on the paper, and now this person went and wrote on top of the letters. So the shaila is he chayiv, is he pater? So now the Gemara brings a very interesting case. Itmar was stated in regards to the discussions about different types of writing. So the Amoraim say, Hamaver diyoi al gabe sikra. If a person, let's say, took black ink and he started writing it on top of words that had red ink on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish Amat Ravayu, Sai Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say that chayiv, this person who takes black ink and writes it on the red ink, even though it was written before the red ink existed, and now he took black ink and he like marked it on the red ink. So the halach is chayiv is going to be chayiv shtayim. He's going to be chayiv 2 korban chatas. Why? Because he was over 2 malachas deiraisa. Achas, one is mishum kaisev, because he was over on kaisev. He wrote 2 asias with ink. Achas, and the other korban chatas is chayiv is mishum, because he was meichik. He erased the letters, and as we said before, that somebody who erases the letters amanas lichtev, so he's going to be chayiv. So now the fact is that he wrote letters. In other words, he wrote on top of the red, so that's considered that he wrote letters, and also he erased the red letters. So he's going to be over now to 2 korban chatas. Now then the Memra says that, so that's the Itmar. Then we learned, it says, but diyoi al gabe diyoi. If a person now is going to take black ink, and he's going to now, let's say, write 2 letters on letters that was already written in black, or sikra al gabe sikra. Let's say he wrote 2 letters which had this red dye, and he wrote it on top of he took these 2 letters and he started writing it with the same ink. So then it's pater. Why is it pater? Because the fact is he didn't do anything. He didn't write, and he did not erase. Okay, now so that's the second din, and the last part of the memory, he says that sikra al gabe diyoi. If let's say he wrote 2 letters, he took this red ink and he wrote it on 2 letters that have black ink. So now amri la chayiv. Some people say that he's going to be chayiv only 1 korban chatas. Amri la pater, and other opinions are going to say that he's totally off the hook. Now the Gemara explains. Amri la, some people say that he's chayiv 1 korban chatas because the fact is meichiku, he erased the first letters. Now even though black ink is better than red ink, so he diminished it, he made it worse. So he's chayiv for writing. He's not chayiv for koisiv. He's not chayiv for writing because the black ink was better than the red ink. So what is he chayiv for? He's chayiv for erasing the black letters. Amri la, and some people say no, pater. He's pater. Why? Because mekalkalhu. Because he didn't. Not only did he not write anything, he also didn't erase anything. He didn't enhance anything. So it's considered like moichik shalel manas lichtev, and therefore he's going to be pater. So now the Gemara says, "Boy, minei Reish Lakish mir Rabbi Yochanan." Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan a question: Eidim shen yedim lachtoim. If you have witnesses who do not know how to sign their names, they don't know how to sign their names. We really had this Gemara once. They don't know how to write their names. Ma'u sheyichtu v'lahem b'sikra. So now the question is, can other people, could they have their names be written with red dye? And then what's going to happen is v'yachtemu, and then they'll trace. The Adam will write with black ink on top of the sikra or not. And he asked him, Ksav Elyon, is the black writing on top of the sikra, is that considered ksav? Is that considered writing or not? And now it came out that the Adam that don't know how to write their names, but they traced their names on top of the red ink, is that considered a kosher chasima or not? Or Reish Lakish asked him, ksav, or if it's not, maybe it's not a good writing, and therefore you don't have a chasima. So Amr Lei, so Reish Lakish tells Rabbi Yochanan tells Reish Lakish that when you have diyoi on top of sikra, ein ksav, it's not considered as a ksav, and therefore it's not considered a kosher. It's not considered a kosher chasima. So Amrele, so Rish Lakish tells Rabbi Yochanan, "V'haloi l'matatonu Rabbeinu," but you taught us in regards to Shabbos that ksav alyin, ksav le'inyan Shabbos. You said before that if somebody takes diyoi, somebody takes red ink, and he writes it 2 letters on top of sikra, you said, Rabbi Yochanan said that he's chayiv for melecha of kaisef. So now, if it works for Shabbos, that it's considered writing, why is it not considered writing in regards to a get? In other words, it has to go hand in hand. You can't pick and choose. So Amar Leis, Rabbi Yochanan tells Rish Lakish, Sha'anu medamin, is because we're machmer by Shabbos, like Rashi explains. Nasa Maisa, you're telling me that we should be mekel halacha l'maisa. In other words, we're just by Shabbos we're machmer, but it doesn't mean that the ksav is considered a ksav by Gittin that we should be mekel. Okay, now the Gemara says another thing. Itmar was stated, Amoraim said, Eidim shen yedim lachtim, if witnesses do not know how to sign on the get, they don't know how to write their names. So Rav says, Mikorin lehem niyar chalak. Rav says, you tear blank paper for them. So in other words, you sketch with like a knife their names on a piece of paper under the get. Memalim esakroim. And then they just fill in their names with, so like you take a knife, you like sketch out the names, and then they fill it in black. Shmuel says that be'avor, with lead. That he first writes the names on the get with lead, and then the witnesses write over those letters. So the Gemara asks, do you think ba'avar sokodaydech? Do you think that do you think that they actually write with lead? If you wrote it with lead, or b'shchar, or with coals, or b'shichar, or with paint, the halacha is kosher. Now, what do we see from this brisa? That when you write with lead, it's considered to be a valid form of writing. Now, Rabbi Yochanan taught that if a person writes on top of other writings, so then the second writing is not accepted for the signing of the Gittin. But you just said, Shmuel said, but so the Rabbi Yochanan says that we do not rely on this ksav. So the Gemara says, like Kash, it's not a question. Why is it not a question? Shmuel that allowed the witnesses to sign on top of lead writing, that's only when the first writing was done with lead itself, which lead itself is not considered kesiva. And Reb Chia's statement that's a valid for writing, that you could use this for a get, applies only when the first writing was done using lead water. In other words, water colored with black with lead. So since the beginning is a kesiva, when you write on it, it's considered like, it's not considered like anything. Now, the Gemara says another solution that you could use to write the names of the witnesses who don't know how to write their names. So he says, Rabbi says, B'mei milan, with gall water. In other words, they write their names with water that you soaked in gall juice, and then they sign it with ink went over the gall nut. So the Gemara says, how does this work? Reb Chia says that ksav b'mei tarya, if you use this mei tarya v'afatza, or let's say gall nut, so then the din is kosher. So l'cheira, if this is kosher, if gall nut juice is considered like ksav, so it comes out that the edim which signed in it are writing on gall nut, which is considered like diyoi al gabi sikra, which Rabbi Yochanan says that diyoi al gabi sikra does not work. So the Gemara answers and says, Lo kasha, it's not a question. Ha the ofitz. This that Ravo said that by a get, which is written on let's say a cloth, which was tanned by gall nut water. So in such a case, so then you could write for the edim their names with gall nut juice, and they can write their with ink, and the chesima will be considered a chesima. However, the brisa which says that such a get, if you use the waters of afutz, it's kosher. That's talking about dafka get that was written on a cloth, but it was not worked on. It wasn't tanned with galnut juice. And the Gemara says that she'ein mei milin al gabi mei milin, because the din is that there's a difference because the galnut is not permanent when applied on top of the galnut, and therefore this mark is not considered like ksav, and that's why the Eidim could sign on top of it. Okay, now the Gemara says another way you could handle this. The Papa says biraik, that they sign their names on top of saliva. So when you use saliva, it's not recognizable, and it's not doesn't really last. So when the Eidim come and sign on it, that's not a problem. And then v'chein oirel le Rav Papa le Papa Teira, and the Gemara says also that Rav Papa instructed Papa, which means Papa Teira, the ox herder. He didn't know how to sign his name, so the Beis Din should write it with saliva, beraik, and then he would trace it with ink. Where it says v'hani mila begittin. Now this leniency, this whole kula that you could use beraik, is only by Gittin. Now, but a regular financial document, that the Chachamim do not allow this, and one must instead find witnesses who know how to sign their names. Okay, so the Gemara says, Dahu Ovid, we're holding the bottom of Yutesam and Aleph. Papa, the last line, Dahu da Ovid. So the Gemara says, Dahu da Ovid Evada b'shtash daris. There was a certain person who performed an action, and he allowed the Eidim to trace their names in case of other documents which were not Gittin. And what happened? V'nagded Rav Kana. Rav Kana ordered that this person who did this should get Malkus. Okay, we're holding now Daf Yutes Amud Beis. Gemara says, Tanya, Kava say the Rav, we learned a brayso like Rav, Eidim Shen Yedim Lachtim, if you have witnesses who don't know how to sign their names, either on a get or other documents, so what do? Mekarin Lahem. What you do is you tear a blank piece of paper for them, Mekarin Lahem Niyar Chalak, like you sketch on the paper, you sketch their name, and Mamalan Asakrayim Diyai, and in the Sirtut, in the etch, you go ahead and you add actual diyoi, actual ink. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, and when do we say that the Chachamim were making such stories is Gittin Nashim dafke by Gittin Nashim? Aval b'shichrurei avodim, when it comes to shichrurei avodim, but let's say when it comes to shtar shichur, that you have to release a Eved Kanani or Shar, called stories, or any other type of document, im yadim likreis, if the Eidim know how to read the ksav and velachtim and sign their names, choismin, then they're allowed to sign. But if the Eidim don't know how to read or don't know how to sign their names, then in choismin, when it comes to ashtar shichr, then we don't rely on it. So the Gemara asks, and again, we had this already once, who mentioned anything about reading? The Tanakam is speaking about Eidim that don't know how to sign their names. Why is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel speaking about anything about reading? So the Gemara says, the brayso is missing some words, and you have to explain the brayso as the Eidim Shen, the Tanakam like this. Eidim Shen Yedim Likreis, when you have Eidim that don't know how to read the shtar, that they need to sign on, so the din is like this. Then, Koidim Lifneim, two Eidim should read the shtar in front of them, and V'choismim, and they could sign on what they read. But if they don't know how to sign their names, so then what's the din? So we sketch out their names and we fill it in. We fill in the etched with diyoi. So it comes out that Tanakama is being makel in regards to the reading of the shtar and also in regards to the chasima, and they said that if the Eidim don't know how to read the shtar, and they don't know how to sign, so nevertheless, they're allowed to sign the shtar if it's read to them. Amar Shimon Gamliel says, when do we say this kula is Gittin Nashim, only by Gittin Nashim, but When it comes to Shichrurei Avadim, with Shar Kol Shtaris, then the din is Im Yodim Likris. If they know how to read, then Velachtem, and to sign, then Choismin, they could sign. And if they don't know how to, then Ein Choismin, they're not allowed to sign. So Rabbi Elazar asks, my time to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, what's the reason of Rabbi Gamliel if other stories? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says it's also to sign. Edom are not allowed to sign if they don't know how to read the shtar. So the question is, why were they makel by Gittin Nashim? So he says, Shalayu Bnei Yisrael Gunis, the Chacham were makel, as we said a few times, that the Chacham don't want, there should be a Gunis, so they were makel in such a case. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava. Rava says, halacha is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The halacha is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who's machmer by other shtaris, that Edom who don't know how to read the shtar are not allowed to sign on it. But by a get he was makel. Rabbi Gamda Mishmei Rava Amar. Rabbi Gamda Mishmei Rava says, Ein halacha. The halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So ask the Gemara of Ela Kaman. According to him, according to Gamda, who's the halacha like? Are you going to say it's Karabanan like the Tanakama who hold that this Chasima works even by other stories? But the Maisa was, that there was a certain person who performed an action, and he allowed witnesses to trace their names in other documents that were not a get, and the Nagdad of Kana. We said Rav Kana gave Malchus. So how could you say the halacha is like the Chachamim? So the Gemara says, Targema Akriya. Rav Gamda interpreted the statement of Rav only in regards to reading, meaning that the halacha is in accordance with the Chachamim and not with Shimon Gamliel, only with regard to the question of whether other shtaris may be read to the witness, but not with regard to whether they may sign other documents by means of a stencil. Okay, now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda mitzstar kari v'chosim. Says, it was told that Rabbi Yehuda was very blind, he was blind in his old age, and kari v'chosim. He could barely read, and he took great pains to read and sign documents as a witness or as a judge. So Rabbi Yehuda, he was had a hard time seeing, but he used to take great pains to read and sign the documents. So Amar le'ula, so Ula told him, Lo yitzrichina, you don't need to do this. You don't need to make yourself crazy to actually read the shtar. Why? To Rabbi Elazar, who was Marad Eretz Yisrael, he was the master. Rabbi Elazar was the master of Eretz Yisrael. Karu kamei v'chasim. Rabbi Elazar, who was a baki in the halachas, he was a master in these halachas, and he was makel that other people, you would read what's written in the shtar, and he would sign on it. Rabbi Nachman, who was in Babel, Karu kamei sofre dayan v'chasim. One of the seifrim would read the shtaris in front of him, and he would sign on it. The Gemara says, "V'dafke Reb Nachman, the Sofri Dayani the Islu Eimsa." So the Gemara says that dafke they were matter that you could rely on somebody reading the shtar is only a guy like Reb Nachman that people had very great respect for him, great awe for him, and he, as we know, he was like the head of the Reish Galusa, the Safra, the Daina. The Isla aims to, Ava bar Rav Nachman v'Safra Achinu, but Rav Nachman himself and if they read in front of him or Safra Dayan of Insha Achini loy. So when it comes to Rav Nachman and other scribes, so the based in scribes and other persons, the halach is that the documents may not be read to the witnesses, and the Safrim may read it because we're worried that the Safrim may read it incorrectly to him. Okay, so now the Gemara brings a behavior of other Amira who had documents read to them. Rapapa, Gemara says Rapapa. When documents that were written in Persian and they were produced in Goyish courts, they came before Rapapa, and we know Rapapa, he didn't know how to read Persian. So what would he do? So they would bring these documents in Barkoy Shel Goyim, Persian documents that were written in a Goyish court, and so what happened is he would have it be read by two Goyim, each one not in the presence of the other person, in the way that each one would speak like Mesiach Levitumai offhandedly, without knowing that they were giving a testimony. So once he clarified that it was written in the document, so and he chapped what was going on, he would collect payment even from liened properties that has been sold because he held that such a document is entirely valid for even other stars. Okay, so Omar Rashi says, Omar li Rav Huna bar Nosson. Rav Huna bar Nosson said to me that Hochi Omar Meimer said, Hai shtara parsoi de chasima alai sadid Yisrael. He said that with regards to the Persian documents with on which Yidden are signed as witnesses, so then Magbin ben Meshabdi, the Beis Din is able to collect payment with it, even if they were already sold, even because it's considered that you can use the shtar for nechasim mishubadim. So the Gemara asks, but they do not know how to read. Most Jews don't know how to read Persian. So the Gemara says, our statement applies when they know how to read Persian. So the Gemara then asks, but you have another problem. How could you rely on such a document, but we require that all documents have to be written in a writing that cannot be forged? And the problem is, this is not so when you have Persian documents. The Persians were not particular about their documents, and it could be a ksav that you can forge. So the Gemara says, Bida afitzin. Here we're talking about a case where the documents was processed with this afitzin, with this gal, and it's impossible to forge this document. So the Gemara says, but you have another problem. You have another problem that in every shtar you have to have a recap of the topic of the document in the last line. And in Persian documents they didn't have this. So the Gemara says, we're talking about, our statement applies in the case where this document was recapped. So the Gemara says, okay, so if Amir is speaking about all these conditions, so what's he teaching me? The Choloshin kosher? That in any language is kosher? Tanina, we already learned, get sheksav iris ve'edav yivanis. If you have a get that he wrote in Hebrew, and its witnesses signed in Greek, or yivanis ve'edav iris, or if you wrote it in Greek and the witnesses signed in Hebrew, so the halacha is kosher. So what's Amir? He's just repeating you a Mishnah? So the answer says, Imahi. If I would only learn it out from the Mishnah, that this only works by Gittin. When it comes to other stars, I would say no. So therefore, Kamash Meimer teaches us that other types of documents are kosher if they are written in any other languages as well. Okay, so Omar Shmuel, the Gemara says, if a man gave his wife a blank piece of paper, and he told her, he gave her a blank piece of paper and he says, behold, here's your document, here's your get. So Shmuel says, Mu goy dashes. They're divorced. Why? It's a blank piece of document. So he says, I'm worried that perhaps he wrote it with this gal water, and really the get was a good get. And the problem is that the words absorbed into the paper and it wasn't visible. But really, the get is a good get. So now the Gemara says, I'm going to ask you a shayla. Meisva, I'm going to ask you a shayla from the following brisa. The brisa says, if a husband says to his wife, Harei ze gitech, here is your get. Unetalta is rakalayam. And instead of opening it and looking at it, she got so angry, she took it and she threw it into the sea. Or she threw it into the fire. Or she threw it into something that destroys. And then, and later he said, you should know it wasn't even a get, rather shtar pasim. What's a shtar pasim? Shtar pasim is a document of appeasement. In other words, when you wanted to, in the olden days, when you wanted to boast how wealthy you are, so you would ask somebody, you know what, sign for me a shtar, you owe me $1 million. So then, when I have to get a line of credit or whatever, I can show the bank, or I can show the lenders, look how wealthy I am. That's a shtar pasim, or shtar amanu, or a document of trust, in which it's a false note given by a person to another, trusting that he will not use it until there has been an actual loan. So the halacha is megoreshes. The halacha is that she is megoreshes. Why? And he does not have the power to make her forbidden to everyone else as Eishes is by saying that it wasn't a real get, and we're still married. Because why? Because he said Hari's a gitech, and now he can't come along and say that I was just joking around. So now the Gemara is mashma wants to bring a raya from this brisa. Time midikakosov. Now, what's the reason she's divorced? Because this get has writing, and there's no way to know. right? Now, but now that she threw it away, you don't know what was written. So we assume that it's a good get. But let's say if he did not have writing, so then the l'chera would be mashma that there's no concern. So what do we see from here? That if there's no writing, there's no concern that perhaps it was really a kosher get, and the guy wrote it in afatz and wrote it in gal. So Shmuel says that if you throw a blank piece of paper, we say that bepashtos there was writing on it, but it got faded out. L'chera from this brisa, which says harizeh gitech, and it works because mashma, because there was a ksav, but I don't know what's written. I don't know what was written in the get. But if I know for sure there was no ksav, so what do I assume? I assume that it's not that I assume that it won't work. So the how could Shmuel say that in such a case? I assume that it really was a real kosher get, but it got faded in. So the Gemara says, Kika Amar Shmuel, when Shmuel said that the woman was divorced with this blank piece of paper, it was in a case the batkinali b'maya denora. It was in a case where we checked the paper with a colored liquid. Now, polit. If the paper expels the writing, you can use this test. You use this color liquid. So if the paper expels the writing, then it expels. Below polit, and if it does not expel, then we know lav klumu. Then we know that the document is nothing and she's not divorced. So the Gemara says v'chi polit may have it, and even if the paper expels the writing, who cares? Hashtu the polit. It's possible that only now it expels the writing, and the letters are becoming visible. But maybe from the beginning there was really no legible writing, and therefore the document is puzzle. So the answer is Shmuel Nami. Shmuel is saying Chayshinan Kamar. We're concerned. In other words, he does not hold that the get is a valid divorce. Rather, the Beis Din takes into account the possibility that he gave her in the beginning was a kosher get, and the halacha is that it's a suffix now. So if he wants to divorce her again, she would have to get a new get. So the Gemara says, Omar Ravina said, Omar li Amemar said to me, Hachi Omar Menimar Mishmei Rav Dimi. This again. Ravina said, Amemar said to me that Menimar said the name of Rav Dimi Azay. Hani Beit today the Yoav Gita Kamayu. These two witnesses who testify that the get was given in their presence. So tzrich mikrayo. They are required to read the get. Yeah. So when you have two witnesses who testify that the get was given in their, when you have these two witnesses who testify that the get was given in their presence, so they have to read it. They're required to read. So the Gemara says, Mason, when ask a shayla, harei gitach when the talton is rakla yamal or the chodavar of the chazav amar shtar pasim who shtar manahu. We just had this brisa. So the halacha is megerashes. V'lo yikol imen lo ishi. So the Gemara says, v'i amar tzrich l'mikrayo. Now, if you're saying that he has to read, that the Eidim have to read the get, Basar de Karuya mi Atzer mi Omar lei hachi. Now, if you're saying that the witnesses need to read the get, then is the husband able to say this after they read the get? How could he say this? So the Gemara says, Lo yisricha, it's necessary. Rav Dimi taught us halach in a case where the Basar de Karuya aili lebe yidei v'apke. He teaches us where, after they read, the husband placed it under his arm and later took it out and gave it to the woman without it being read again. So Ma'al Detema, you would say that chalufei chalfei. You would say that maybe he switched this get with another document, and what he gave her was not really a get; it was a document just to appease her of her claims. So Kamash Malan, Rav Dimi teaches us that the Beis Din don't need to be concerned that he switched the get.
What do you mean? Why would he be concerned?
Because he put it into his arm, and now he like played like a, we don't know what happened. He put it into his arm, into his armpit, so you can't see it, and then he took it out again. So maybe it's a different get. Okay, the Gemara says this: Hahu garva the zargle gita the besu lebein danai. There was a certain man who threw. In other words, he says that this is a get. He threw it to his wife in her courtyard, and what happened was ishtakech mizusta. Now he claimed that he's throwing a get to his wife in her courtyard, which a chutzner could make her divorced, and it was amongst barrels. And in the end, they found the mezuzah. So the question is, do I have a chash now that he threw her a get, and now Be'emes the get was destroyed, and the mezuzah happened to be in the same location, or perhaps he threw a mezuzah, and he says, and he claims, and he only is making up a story that it was a get. So Amar Rav Nachman says is mezuzah beinei danei lo yishchichi. He says like this: a mezuzah is not found amongst barrels. So we could assume that he threw the mezuzah and not the get. So now that he's claiming that it's a get, we say it's a bluff. It wasn't a get; it was a mezuzah. Because what in the world is a mezuzah doing by barrels? Now, so the Gemara says, "V'hani mili yishtaka chada." Now, this statement only applies when one mezuzah is found. The guy threw something. You see one mezuzah, so you said, "What is mezuzah doing about barrels?" It must be that he threw a mezuzah.
What if there's 2 or 3?
Right. But what if there's 2 or 3? We say that this mezuzah was also there before the husband came, and as the get also, and the get is also there. So but when there's 2 or 3 were found, then we say that as this, the other mezuzah was there. This mezuzah was also there before the husband came. Okay, so where's the get? We say that the mais later took it, and the woman really was already divorced from the moment that it reached her chutzner. Okay, we'll do one more story and then we'll stop for a minute. We'll do chazar and then stop. Listen to this story. There was a certain man who came into the shul. He took a sefer Torah. Came to the shul. He took a sefer Torah and he gave it to his wife. And he says, "Hey Gittin, here's your divorce. Here's your get. Here's your get. Take the sefer Torah." So Rabbi Yosef says, "L'mai leichushli." So what Rabbi Yosef said, what is there to be concerned? In other words, why would I think it's a good get? If you're going to say that we're going to be concerned that this is due to mei milin, the gallwater. Maybe perhaps you wrote a get on the outside of the sefer Torah parchment with gallwater, and now the writing is not visible. Now, we have a din that gallwater is not permanent when applied on top of a gallwater. Now, since parchment for the Torah scroll is processed with gallwater, it's not possible to write something with gallwater that will remain permanently on the parchment itself. So therefore, there's no concern that he wrote a get on the parchment, because I say that it didn't last. So exactly what's your concern? So now the Gemara says, Daf Chof Amid Aleph. So what's the concern? The concern is that Imishum Krisus to Isba, if the concern is that the Torah, that this scroll can affect the divorce. Why? Because the pasuk says, due to the psukim concerning the psukim in the Torah speaks about Krisus, right? But we have another problem. But you have another problem. That he has to write for her, which we know he has to write the Shema of the woman. So in the Sefer Torah, when the Sefer writes the Torah, he has to write it. It has to be written for the express kavanah of being used to affect divorce between this specific man and this specific woman. And Veleka, and obviously the guy who came to the Sefer Torah, to the shul and took the Sefer Torah, the Sefer for sure never had such kavanah. Now, chitim, if you're going to say that, and maybe you're concerned that perhaps he gave a dinner to the Sefer in the beginning. When he wrote the Torah, he says he told him to write the psukim. In other words, you're writing a Sefer Torah. When you write the psukim of divorce in Pashas Nasai, have in mind my wife. But haba'inan shina shma yushma. But you have another problem. You have a problem that isn't there. And you have a need that other things also have to be written in the get as well. As the Mishnah says, if the Sefer changed his name or her name, or Shem Ida v'Shem Ida, the name of his city or the name of her city, then the get is puzzle. So, in other words, the validity of the get depends upon these details being written. And the fact is in the Sefer Torah, you don't have this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef, Maika Mashman. So, if so, what is Rabbi Yosef teaching us with this statement? It's obvious that there's no reason why would I say that this Torah, that the guy went into the shul and gave it, why would it work? The Gemara says, She'ein mei milin agabe mei milin. The Gemara says he's teaching us that gall water is not permanent when it is applied to the gall water. So the chiddush is that there's no need to be concerned that the Sefer wrote a get in gallwater on the top of the parchments because that's impossible for it to stick. Okay, let's make a quick chazara and we'll take a 2-minute break. Okay, so we started off with the Halakha Mishnah on Daf Yitesam and Aleph. We said that when it comes to writing of the get, you could write it with inks of diyoi. We said this is a black ink with sam, sikra, bekumis, uvakankantam, uchodavishu, shalkayama, but you're not allowed to write it on things that are liquid or fruit juice, which it's not something which the ink or the writing will stick. You could also write it on any material you want. You could write it on an olive tree if it's detached, or you could write it on the horn of a para, of a cow, as long as you give the para to the woman. You could write it on the hand of the eved, and as long as you give the eved to the woman. It basically says it doesn't work that way. You cannot write it on davar sheish beruach chaim and not on eichlim. So the Gemara says, what's the yoy, yuta, sam, sama, sikra? The Gemara explains what each one is. Then the Gemara says, b'chol davar shehu miskayim. So the Gemara says, what are you adding by b'chol davar shehu miskayim? Coming to add that if you wrote it with this mei tarya or rafatza, it will be kosher. Taner Reb Chia, if you wrote it with lead or black or b'shicher, it's kosher. Itmar, then we said, in regards to Shabbos, that if a person took black ink and wrote it over 2 letters, which this letters was written with red ink on Shabbos, so Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish will say that you're going to be chayiv sai for ksiva and sai for mechika, and therefore you're chayiv 2 korban chatas. But if it's diyoi al gabi diyoi or sikra al gabi sikra, you're potter. Now sikra al gabi diyoi, so then the shaila is, are you chayiv 1 korban chatas or not? So some people say you're chayiv, and some people say you're potter. Some people say you're chayiv because you were moichik the red letters. And some people say you're potter because you're mekalkal. Now, Rish Lakish asked the Shat Rabbi Yechanan, Eidim that don't know how to sign their own names, can they sign it? Can you write the names with sikra and sign it with black ink? So the Gemara says, do I say ksav elyon is a ksav eina ela, or maybe it's not a ksav? So he says, no, it doesn't work. You can't take black ink and write it on top of the red. So he says, but you told us on Shabbos that in regards to Shabbos, a person's chayiv. So he says, you can't bring a raya over there. Over there we were machmer, but doesn't mean that l'kula I'm going to be makel by this get that it will work. Itmar, we said also, Eidim that don't know how to sign their names. Rav says that we sketch out their names and they fill it in black. Shmuel says it could be done with lead. So he says, lead? You can't, if lead, you could use the chatchila. So you can't take lead, sign on it, and then use it with black ink to say, and the black ink is considered a ksav. It doesn't work that way. So the Gemara says it depends what type of lead, if it's straight lead, if it's water lead. Rabbi Bo says, b'mei milin, but the we learned b'mei tarya rafotz is kosher. So he says it depends if it was hide, if that was used or not. Okay, now. Papa gave another way you could do it is with saliva, and when the saliva worked, to write the names by Gittin Daf, it won't work. He says because there was a certain guy that used saliva by Shashtaris, and he used Adam that don't know how to sign their names, and they used the saliva trick, and he gave Rav Kana gave Malchus. Tanya Kabbalah say the Rav, we learned in a brayso like Rav, Adam that don't know how to sign on it. So again, you sketch their name out, and they fill it in with black ink. That's only by Gittin Daf, but Shechur Avadim and other stars. So if they know how to read and sign, then great. If not, then it will not work. So the Gemara says, who mentioned anything about reading? So the Gemara says, we're missing words, and what he means to say is Aiden that don't know how to read. So you read the stars in front of them, and then they sign. But if they don't know how to sign, then you could read to them and they sign it. Rav Shimon says that only works by Gittin Daf, but Shechur Avadim and other stars, if they know how to read and sign, great. If not, not. Amar Rabbi Lazar, what's the reason Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who's Mekel, Shelo Yeh Bnei Yisrael Agunas? Amar Rabbi Allah is Rashbag, Maganda says the halacha is not like him. So who's going to be like the Rabbanan? But he gave Malchus on him. So the Gemara says he's going on the Kriya. Rabbi Yehuda used to take great pain, even though he had a hard time seeing, and to read and to sign. So we'll tell him you don't need it. Why? Because Rabbi Lazar was Mara there at Yisrael. They used to read in front of him and sign it. Yeah, these days, people come to these great people, sign. They don't even read what they're signing. They just, I trust you. Okay.
My attorney says it's okay, sign. Okay.
Yeah, but this is even another thing. Is you have sometimes these kol keders, these mechaz that people make, and they come and they get the signs by the rabbanim. They don't even read the shtar. They don't read anything. They don't even know what's written. Oh, sign. They sign it, and they just force the guy in. So Shaila is by Gittin, does that work? So he says, but Rabbi Elazar Mardar to saw Korah Kamei v'Chosim Reb Nachman, they used to read in front of him, and he used to sign. So Dafka Reb Nachman, people were scared of him, but other people, it doesn't work. And he says, Papa, he had this, so he says that, Rashi says, the Papa, they brought these Persian stars in front of him that were produced by the Goyim, and what he did is he used to ask the Goyim exactly what's going on over here, and he used that star to be, that the Malvik can go ahead and even take from the Chosim Mishubadim. Now Rashi says, Rav Huna Bar Nosson said, that the Meimer said the star of the Persians, that Yiddish Edom sign on it, you could collect from it. So the Gemara says, but they don't even know what they're reading. So the Gemara says, we're talking about, they know what they're reading. You have a concern that it's exception Yachal is Dai if they're talking about that they use Afitzin. You need to have Tzarech Lachser and Yanish Shtar B'Shita Achrena. It's talking about that we did have it. So what's the Chiddush? The Chiddush is that the Chayr we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says Get Shiksavu Ivris, and you had it signed in Lashon Yevonis, or the opposite, it's kosher. So where it says, I would think that only works by Gittin, but by other stars it's not kosher. Therefore he teaches us that even other stars you could use this din. Shmuel says, if a man gave his wife a blank document and said, this document is your get. So the din is, it's mugureshes, because I'm worried that maybe he wrote the get with mei milin, and it faded out. So the Gemara says, I'm going to ask you a shayla from a brisa. The brisa says, if he tells his wife, here's your get, and she gets so angry she throws the get into the yam, or to the fire, or to the chol davar avad, and then he comes back and says, by the way, I was playing with you. It's a shtar pasim or shtar amana. So the din is, it's mugurashes. Why? And he does not have the right to tell her, now you can't get married to anybody else. So the Gemara says, what's the reason why it works? Because I assume that there was a ksav, but I can't see it because it's burned. But if there's no ksav, so then it won't work. But we know Shmuel says that even if there's no ksav, it will work, because I assume that it faded out. So the Gemara says, when did Shmuel say that you use this liquid to go and see if it extracts or not? So he says, but even if it extracts, that's maybe it happened now. But who said by the time that she was given the get, there was actually oisius that you could read? So the Gemara says, Shmuel is just saying chashinan. And you have these two people that bring the get, they have to read it also. So the Gemara says, I'm going to ask you this case of Harizagitach. I see over there that if you're saying that he has to read it, so how could he read it after this was done? So the Gemara says is, after he read it, I would think that he put it into his shoulders, or he put it into his armpit, and maybe it's something else, Kamash Malan, that we don't say that. Then we said that there was a man that threw a get to his wife, and they came and they picked up the document and they found a mezuzah. So Nachman says, you don't have to worry about that it's a get, we say that it's a mezuzah. Now, Hani Mili is, if there's one document, that document is a mezuzah. But if you have a few documents over there, a few mezuzahs, so we assume that the mezuzahs were there before, and what happened to the get? A mice ate the get, but really the get was a good get. Okay, so then the Gemara said a funny story. The guy came into the Sefer Torah, came into the shul, he grabbed the Sefer Torah, he comes to his wife and he says, here's your get. So the Gemara, Rabbi S wants to know, okay, why would I b'chlal think that this is a good get? If you're going to think that he wrote the get on top of the parchment in the front, so we know that there's ein mei milim agav mei milim. It doesn't work that way. So the Gemara says, and if you're mishum krisus, because of the psukim, you need to have the kasod l'lishma, and you don't have that. Let's be worried that perhaps this guy, when he saw the sefer, and he says, you know what, I have raibanish with my wife. Here's $1 or whatever. Here's a couple bucks. And when you go ahead and write the parshas of the wife of the get, just have in mind my wife. So he says we don't say that. Why? Because you need to have. We know the din is that if you change the shema, shemira, and you don't have that. So the Gemara says okay. So what's Rabbi Yosef teaching me? He says he's teaching me the din of ein mei milan agabe mei milan. Okay, we'll stop.